everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. And we're so excited today. We have the director of the Best Christmas Pageant Ever movie and the Chosen series. We have Dallas Jenkins here. And Dallas, thank you so much for coming on and talk with us.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. You were an early adopter. I saw you
Yeah.
reviewing the trailer for Best Christmas Pageant Ever before anyone else, and so I thought, oh, this would be fun to talk to you about it.
Well, thank you so much for doing that. And I've actually been a big fan of yours for a long time.
No way.
I got the season one of The Chosen in April of 2020. I was asked to review it, and I was, I think, the third critic to post a review for season
Oh,
one
wow.
on Rotten Tomatoes, positive review, and I really enjoyed it. And I said at the time, I highly recommend it for anyone of faith that is looking for quality storytelling. So
Well,
it's
thank
been,
you. That's very kind. I didn't actually know that. And what I would say is, I would say that over the last several years, it has been very clear that many people are watching the show that don't come into it with a faith background. And so it's not just for people of faith, I
mm,
think.
yeah,
Although of course I appreciate your review, but 30 to 40% of our viewers of The Chosen are not traditional believers, and they're just watching it as a historical drama,
oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
which has been really cool to see as well. And it's the same thing with the Best Christmas Pageant Ever, which we know, of course, has a faith element to it, and that it's ultimately about the birth of Jesus, like any other Christmas pageant. But that ultimately I mean, the critics and the New York Times gave it a positive review. I mean, people have, I think, just like good stories well told, I think. And I think with when it comes to whether it's The Chosen or the Best Christmas Pageant Ever, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to tell a
yeah.
good story, I'm trying to tell it well. And I'm not shy about my faith background, but you don't have to have my same background to enjoy it.
Well, I was going to ask you, was your goal to make Christian movies for general audiences, or to just make crowd pleasing movies for Christians? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I think I would probably think of a third category, which
Mm,
is a movie for everyone or a
mm,
TV show for everyone. And I happen to be a Christian, and I'm going to be telling stories that reflect that experience, and some of my beliefs. But I don't believe that even the term Christian movie can kind of come with it, kind of a weird connotation. Like, well, it's a
yeah.
movie. Half the cast and crew aren't traditional believers. Does that mean anything? Is the film that it's printed on Christian? It's hard to it's kind
Hmm.
of becomes a funny definition. And so you know what? I think it's better when we can just say this is it's certainly a Christmas movie. And I think anytime we try to categorize it too much, then it starts to maybe feel like
Hmm.
it's exclusive. It's exclusive. And I think
Yeah.
one of the major messages of the Best Christmas Pageant Ever is, in fact, that the Christmas story is for everyone, and that
Yeah.
there's room at the inn for everyone.
Yeah. So you had been a fan of this story of this book and the story for a long time. Why did it strike you so much?
Well, when almost 20 years ago, my wife brought the book home. She bought it it was on the counter at a Pottery Barn, kind of one of those little $5, just grab it and impulse purchase. And she brought it home, and I remembered reading it as a kid in public school, but I didn't remember much about it. And so I'm reading it to my kids for felt like the first time, and it's so witty and it is so smart. I was like, this doesn't feel like a little kid's book. This feels like a anyone of any age can appreciate this. There's a lot of great humor, a lot of wit to it, nostalgia. It's Christmas. It's childhood. It's adulthood. It's everything. I just loved it. And so I'm laughing. And then the story of the worst kids in the history of the world, the Herdmans, who are going to hijack this Christmas pageant. As someone who grew up going to church and doing Christmas pageants, I'm like, I remember those kids that, you felt like, you know what, they're going to ruin everything for us. And I also felt, of course, like, well, maybe it needs to be ruined because these pageants are boring, or I do the same thing every year. So all those things I resonated with. I get to the last chapter. I am crying so hard when they finally put on this Christmas pageant, and the lessons that come from it, and what happens when kind of heaven meets earth in some ways through this pageant and through the eyes of these kids who are troubled and in poverty. I can't even read. I'm crying so much. I'm like ugly crying. And my wife grabs the book. She goes, let me read it. And then she starts crying and she can't get through it. So we're just passing it back and forth to each other. And so when I closed the book, I said, I have to make this movie. I don't know how this movie hasn't been made before. It was a TV movie in the early 80s, kind of a short, less than an hour long. I'm like, this has everything that I want in a Christmas movie. The comedy, the pathos, the and then of course that it's about kids, and I have a heart for troubled kids. I'm an adoptive parent. I'm like, everything about this is meant for me. And so I pursued the rights for almost 20 years and couldn't get them because they were always going with some big studio or big director. And I hadn't had too much success at that point. Finally, The Chosen comes out, and The Chosen becomes a significant success. And the rights holders saw it, and the other studios couldn't get it made. And I finally got it myself, and the rest is history, hopefully. And so, as I talk to you, even the fact that I made a movie called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever that you had a chance to see is in and of itself a dream come true for me.
It's so exciting. I mean, I have been a big fan of the play as a theater critic for a long time, the theatrical adaptation. And I haven't read the book in a long time, but I, at least from the play, I felt like you kept very close to the
Yeah.
play. And was that a challenge to adapt?
Well, I honestly wasn't. I didn't base it at all on the play, although the
Okay.
play is do. I've seen it a couple times. My kid was in it at his high school several years ago. But the similarities are in the fact that the play has to kind of do some of the same things a movie would have to do, which is
Right, yeah.
some of those thoughts that in the book you can get inside someone's head. You can't do that unless they talk in a movie or play. So there's some similarities there. I mean, I love the book so much that I want to do it honor. I want to do it justice. But then, of course, we have to expand, and even on the play, because even the play has limitations. We can take you into different locations, more
Right.
locations, more cast than what you'd get in the play or the book. But I have not heard from a single person who liked the book that they were disappointed in the movie, including the author's daughter. The author, Barbara Robinson, is no longer with us, but her daughter sent me a beautiful text that said she was just in tears and she was laughing, and she just said, "My mother is cheering you on right now, having from watching it." And so that meant a lot because I love the book and I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to. I don't feel like it needed to be changed. Now, of course, I had to do things that the book couldn't do, and I expanded on some of those themes and some of those moments, but only in service of the story ultimately.
Well, I was so happy that it didn't feel like you modernized it. I mean, you kept
Right.
it in the past, but even just the way the characters were talking and the way they were behaving, it I think that added a nostalgia to it that was very comforting and perfect for this kind of movie.
Yeah, everyone who watches it says it feels nostalgic. It feels
Yeah,
timeless. I intentionally didn't want you to know what decade we were in. We borrowed from all decades, going
mm.
even from the '60s, and even a little bit from today. But nothing that made it only today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like it would have been
So
so obnoxious if you'd had like
yes.
the Herdmans with their cell phones or
Oh yeah,
something
of
like
course.
that.
No, that would have been
Yeah,
a huge mistake. So we want it to feel like then. We want it to feel like whether it's whether you're in your 60s or whether in your 40s or whether you're in your 20s or whether you're 10 years old and you have a kind of a vision of of when you were younger at Christmas. We want you to feel that this is timeless, and that in 30 years you're going to be able to watch this movie and it's still not going to feel dated.
hmm
And so that can only be achieved through timelessness. And I think there's movies like Paddington 2, Babe, um, A Christmas Story, of course, that have that timeless feel. I really wanted to use those movies and Norman Rockwell paintings as kind of a visual and tonal guide for the creation of
hmm
the production.
Was there any debate about how bad to make the Herdmans if you were going to go? I was so surprised that you had them smoking.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a big surprise for me.
So briefly there was a debate where, because in the opening paragraph of the book is the Herdmans were absolutely the worst kids in the history of the world. She says they cussed, they lied, they stole, they took the Lord's name in vain, they smoked cigars, even the girls. They even set fire to this tool shed, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
so I said to the studio when we first met, I said, listen, whatever arguments we're going to have creative, that's all fine and good, but I'm not budging on this one because there's two reasons why it was important to keep that stuff in. Number one, there's something to the innocence of that in her mind, them being the worst kids of the history of the world was because they did things like smoke cigars. If we went truly to what, if you said today, who's the worst child in the world literally, well, it's probably doing some things or exposed to some things that would not make for a, a
Yeah.
Christmas movie. You don't want to go so realistic that it's ridiculous. And that's part of charm of the movie is that, in this kind of American suburban world, seeing it through the eyes of a kid who's saying these Herdman kids were so bad. Can you believe it? They smoke cigars. There's nothing worse than that. And so I said, we have to keep that in. And number two is, I didn't want to violate the spirit of the book and to sanitize it so much that we act like smoking a cigar on screen is so horrifying
They wouldn't even
that,
let Cruella de Vil smoke
right,
in
right. But we're showing it as
Yeah.
as a controversial thing, right? And so I appreciate that Lionsgate, they mentioned, does she have to smoke? And maybe we don't have them burn down the tool shed because that's arson and that's a pretty big deal. And I said, no, these are things that have to be kept in, and we'll do it from a whimsical place.
Mhm.
And we'll point out that, like in the book, the shed, everyone was wanting the shed to be burned down anyway, and no one got hurt.
Right.
And so, it's like that middle ground between a Stranger Things style, true horror film of what can happen in the world of a kid's world, but also keeping it like, what, this is a PG Christmas story. There's certain things, as you know, as well as anyone, because of your podcast, there's certain boxes you want to check. And we're not trying to make some sort of statement here about
Right.
evil and good or anything like that. So let's keep it light but fun. And to their credit, they lived up to their promise of protecting what this book was trying to say.
Was it challenge doing the casting for the kids and then you have Judy and Pete and the other cast?
Yeah, of course. I mean, finding the right person for the role is a sacred thing. Judy Greer, who I love, and I'm sure you do too. Everyone loves Judy Greer.
Yeah.
She played the mom beautifully. Pete Holmes, an unusual choice as a stand-up comic and only part-time actor, to kind of put him in this role. I really was pushing for him from the beginning, and the studio was at first was like, "Huh, that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense." But let's see what else is out there. And I told Pete, I'm like, it always came back to you. I always ultimately Pete was the right run for the role and loved it and did a great job. Then Lauren Graham as the narrator, as the older Beth, who's also has a scene, of course, in the movie. That was a huge win. I'm a huge fan of Parenthood and Gilmore Girls and all of that. So that was a gift. The challenge, of course, with the kids is finding kids who can also walk that line between humor and pathos. You want them to be able to be funny, but you also want them to be able to pull off these emotional moments. And so that's difficult to find. And so after hundreds of hours of auditions, you narrowing it down, it can always be a challenge. But man, these kids were so good. And then directing them can be challenging because, of course, ADHD is present in half the kids who get into this business. But I was also a parent and a leader and a psychologist and a director all in one, and made it. I think I had to use all of my skills in that regard. But ultimately, these kids were a gift. I mean, I think you would agree the
So
performances
cute.
from the
Yeah.
kids are really beautiful.
Yeah, really good. Was it a challenge to figure out, okay, how much do we paint the churchgoers? How judgy do we make them? How do we draw that line?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a responsibility to show that even churchgoers can do wrong things too and have wrong perspectives. So you don't want to make it that the church people are good and everyone outside the church is evil. I mean, my belief as a Christian is that we're all equally problematic. We all are all equally in need of a savior. And so, I'm not a good Christian, which is why I'm a Christian.
Right.
That's what the approach and the belief that we have. And so showing that everyone is missing the boat and everyone has something to learn here in this process, I think was the best way to tell the story and the most honest way to tell the story. So I heightened it a little bit from the book. For the sake of a movie, you want it to be, especially a fun Christmas movie. You want clear lines to be drawn as to who's who. And so, but yeah, it was never controversial for me. I really did want to do an honest portrayal of, I mean, again, it is a heightened reality. It's a comedy. It's meant to be
Mhm.
a little bit of a child's view of things. And so things are going to be a little exaggerated. But we wanted to be honest about the fact that sometimes we as a church can be a little bit judgmental, not only of bad kids, but sometimes in our disagreements with parents about things, we can kind of get too rigid in our approach. And so hopefully this movie reminds us of what it really does look like to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
Well, the Herdmans have such a fresh perspective on the birth of the Savior, and I thought it was so moving every time she looks at Mary and they talk about them being refugees and just how shocked they are by that. Do you feel like you came to a greater understanding of the Christmas story through making the movie?
Well, I will say not necessarily from making the movie because it was through reading the book, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, reading the book then became, I became obsessed with telling the story because I believed in it so much. So I don't know that I necessarily, I mean, added something to that emotional moment that I experienced and that spiritual moment that I experienced of, oh my goodness, have I been someone who treats the Herdmans in a way that they shouldn't be treated? Am I someone who has taken for granted some of these stories? I think that I have. But that's what I'm trying to do with The Chosen and what I'm trying to do with the best Christmas pageant ever is remove those things that we have put in between us and the true story, the authenticness of who Jesus was. And sometimes it's our church, sometimes it's our sin, sometimes it's our own dogma or some of the art that we've seen or done that distances us from the true story. So that lesson I learned reading the book, and and so by the time I made the movie, I was my job was to get people, the viewer, to have the same response that I had.
Well, what would be your pitch to the Hallmarkies listener? Come out, see the best Christmas pageant ever. What would you say?
Well, I would assume that if you're a listener to this podcast, you're a fan of Hallmark movies and
Yes.
you're a fan of idealized stories and storytelling. And that's what we love about Hallmark movies is that, just around Christmas time, especially, we want to see a little bit of an idealized version of what life can be and hopefully make it true for us, right? That life can be as good as a Hallmark movie and Hallmark movie can maybe elevate some of what we go through. Well, this movie, I believe, has just enough of Hallmark in it, but also enough of maybe some things that you wouldn't normally see in a Hallmark movie, and that can really, I believe, um, engage and revitalize your love of Christmas. And so if you're going to be watching a dozen Hallmark movies, or if you're going to watch every Hallmark Christmas movie, maybe it'd be nice just take a little break from one for a moment and watch this one. And I promise it won't be such a departure that you feel like you're cheating on your Hallmark movie. This has got just enough Hallmark so that you'll appreciate it, but also enough of what you would normally see in a theatrical film. I think this is one worth going to the theater to see and to add to the pantheon of Christmas classics, hopefully.
I agree. I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for coming and talking with us. I really appreciate it. And thanks for making the movie. Congratulations. I think it was a great success.
Yeah, I appreciate your support and spreading the word about it.
Ho, ho, ho. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast, especially at Christmas?
Do you enjoy the holiday previews, recaps, interviews, and bonus episodes?
If the answer is yes, please consider supporting the Hallmarkies Patreon. We need your help to do what we do both during the Christmas season and all year round.
But not only do you help a podcast led by strong, independent women by becoming a Patreon, you get to become a part of the Hallmarkies family.
Starting at only $2 a month as a patron, you will have access to our Facebook Patreon group where we talk about the movies, shows, and more all year.
We also have many monthly patron watch-alongs with guests like Lacey Chabert, Natalie Hall, Paul Campbell, Mary Lou Henner, and more, giving their behind-the-scenes details of their films.
As a patron, you also have the chance to provide input into the podcast and even join us at different tiers.
So this Christmas season, spread some cheer to the Hallmarkies Patreon and become a member today. You won't regret it.
Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies to learn more.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies. I'd like to thank Dallas for coming on the podcast. This was so much fun to get to talk with him. I really, really appreciate everything he had to say. And I hope you all see the movie and let me know what you think of it after you see it and put that in the comments section or on Twitter. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. Also, make sure that you are following the podcast at Hallmarkies Pod and Hallmarkies Podcast, all of our social media. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. We really appreciate that. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that so much. And we also have our Patreon group, which is the biggest way you can support us so we can do cool things like this. And you could have cool opportunities like we have our patron watch along coming up next week with Topher Payne watching A Gift to Remember. So those are the experiences you get if you sign up for the Patreon. It's really good. And then we have the merch store where you get all kinds of fun, cool Christmas themed design. So please take a look at that. And thanks again to Dallas. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.